Andy's had a career, as most of you will know, that spanned, I think, 20 years at Nissan, where you were responsible for rebooting the product range and, of course, introducing the Nissan Leaf. You managed to turn Aston Martin back to profitability, also reboot their product range with the DBX and, of course, the Valkyrie. You've got Gigafactory experience with Innobat. You were obviously at Switch for a long time, the oft-remarked Tesla of buses and trucks. And you've got a whole host of other interesting EV angles. What do you see the challenges and the opportunities for OEMs? Because it's clearly a minefield to get this stuff right.
Yeah, I mean, it's any pivot, and the industry doesn't pivot that often, but this pivot is at least as big as horse and carriage to car. So there's going to be a whole bunch of car companies that get it wrong and a whole bunch that get it right. I would speculate that the number of car companies out there, perhaps in 2020, will be the same, more or less the same number as in 2050. Just the names on the list will have changed, and clearly there's going to be some some new entrants that disrupt. I guess Tesla, NIO, etc. And clearly there's going to be some storied brands that disappear because they didn't move quick enough, or they plonk themselves in the wrong part of the segment.
And we've got a panel on charging networks and some of the issues around that coming up this afternoon. But I know you've got some experience on that side on charging. What's your thoughts on that?
The infrastructure is really, really important, and if we look to the UK government, because we'll come on to a bit of government bashing later, no doubt, the inability of the government to support the rollout of charging infrastructure, the stupidity of eliminating the grant last March to stifle that rollout, and basically the lack of, to use easy words, of levelling up. You can get a reasonable infrastructure in London, but go outside of London and try finding a fast charger that works. It's not easy. Yeah. So the two, as I said, the car industry can't look by itself to solve this problem. For sure, it's one of the elements. But the big difference between a gasoline vehicle and an electric vehicle is the need to play nicely in the sandpit together with other players. And that needs governments around the world to act as a stimuli.
There's certainly, I think, a sense from the industry that in the UK we've been behind the curve. And now the US, of course, is still on a march on Europe, and we're waiting for Europe's response on that. Yeah. And you've been an advisor to the government, I think, in the past. Do you think that's heard now by the current administration in the UK? Do you think that changes?
The current UK government response to net zero journey is just inept. I don't find any other word for it. The idea that you don't even know whether, as a government, you really want to support the auto industry or not. There is no industrial strategy. Let me put it like this. Would you invest in shares in a company that didn't have a corporate plan? Because UK doesn't have a corporate plan. It doesn't actually know. There is no consensus over whether it wants to support its car industry and grow its car industry, or, as sometimes you hear, it finds the car industry to be a pain and it would be better to let it die. The point is that within that space, there's 800,000 people in this country who put food on their table through the car industry, and that's why I call it inept. So as you pivot, what I think certainly China has understood, what the US has understood and reacted to through the IRA, what you'll see in May, I think, in the EU reacting to that, what you can see in India, is governments that understand that if you don't have a battery supply chain in your country, you don't make cells in your country, then you won't have a car industry 10 years from now.
And we're all, I think, waiting for a bit more direction, but the window just continues to close, right?
The reality is that the longer we go on, the earlier the 2026 date, it's a ramp, as you know, but by 2026, 65% of the cell needs to be made locally in Europe. The longer that you're postponing the decision, the less likely it is that you'll invest in the UK, and the more likely it is that you'll invest either in EU or in the US. And the fascinating part of this is that the US is now in competition with the EU, but it's also mandatory that the UK government understands that the UK is now in competition with both of those players. And competition means that you have to artificially stimulate the market. You have to level that playing field.
This content is based on information available at the time it was recorded and is for informational purposes only. It is not an offer to buy or sell or a solicitation, and no recommendations are implied. It is outside the scope of this communication to consider whether it is suitable for you and your financial objectives.